Somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula, around 70,000 years ago, a small group of humans walked out of Africa and never came back. They had no map, they had no destination. They weren't explorers. They weren't trying to change history. They were simply moving the way humans had always moved, following coastlines, tracking animals, searching for food. But when they left Africa, they weren't walking into an empty world. Europe already belonged to the Neanderthals. Asia was home to Homo erectus. Denisovans occupied vast territories stretching across the east, and on the islands of Indonesia, another species of human had been living for hundreds of thousands of years. The first humans who left Africa weren't entering a wilderness. They were entering someone else's world. And somehow, they became the only humans left. Every non-African person alive today descends from that group, or possibly from an even smaller one. The entire genetic diversity of billions of people outside Africa traces back to what may have been a single migration event, a bottleneck so narrow that modern humans outside Africa are genetically far more similar to one another than the incredible diversity that remained behind in Africa. In fact, Africa still contains more human genetic variation than the entire rest of the world combined. The people who left took only a tiny fraction of what existed, yet that fraction would eventually spread across every continent on Earth. But they weren't the first to try. Fossil evidence from sites in Israel and Greece suggests that modern humans made earlier journeys out of Africa long before the successful migration. Some may have reached parts of Eurasia as early as 180,000 years ago. They left behind bones, stone tools, scattered traces of their existence. And then, nothing. The trail goes silent. Whether those groups died out, retreated back into Africa, or were absorbed into other populations, we still don't know. What we do know is that the world outside Africa was already occupied. Homo erectus had been living across Asia for more than 1 million years. Neanderthals dominated Europe and Western Asia. They were strong, intelligent, cold-adapted, and had already survived countless climate shifts before our ancestors ever arrived. Further east lived the Denisovans, and on the island of Flores, a tiny human relative known as Homo floresiensis had survived for hundreds of thousands of years in isolation. The world our ancestors entered was not a world waiting for humans. It was a world that already had them. So what happened when they met? For decades, scientists believed the answer was simple. Modern humans arrived, the others disappeared. End of story. But that explanation turned out to be wrong. In 2010, geneticist Svante Pääbo and his team extracted DNA from Neanderthal bones and sequenced the genome. What they found changed our understanding of human history. Modern humans outside Africa carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Not contamination, not coincidence, inheritance. At some point in the Middle East or Western Asia, modern humans and Neanderthals had children together. Then came another surprise. A tiny finger bone discovered in a cave in Siberia belonged to an entirely different group of humans, the Denisovans. When scientists sequenced their DNA, they found something remarkable. Populations in Papua New Guinea and Aboriginal Australians carry significant amounts of Denisovan ancestry, and people living on the Tibetan Plateau possess a Denisovan-derived genetic adaptation that helps them survive in low-oxygen environments. Some of humanity's most important adaptations didn't evolve entirely within our species. They were inherited from other humans who were already there. The picture that emerged wasn't replacement, it was absorption. Modern humans entered territories already occupied by other human species. Sometimes they competed, Sometimes they coexisted. Sometimes they interbred. The result is that fragments of those ancient populations still survive today, hidden within our DNA. The others didn't completely vanish. Parts of them are still here, inside us. But not every group left the genetic legacy. Some disappeared entirely. Homo floresiensis, the small-bodied humans of Flores, vanished around 50,000 years ago. The timing is difficult to ignore. Modern humans arrived in the region at roughly the same time. Whether through competition, environmental disruption, or direct conflict, the Flores hominins disappeared shortly after contact. The pattern appears again and again. Across Australia, giant animals vanished within a few thousand years of human arrival. Across the Americas, many large mammals disappeared after humans crossed from Siberia. Neanderthals survived multiple ice ages. They endured climate changes that lasted tens of thousands of years. Yet, within a few thousand years of modern humans arriving in Europe, they were gone. The species that had survived for hundreds of thousands of years could not survive contact with us. We didn't simply leave Africa. We transformed every landscape we entered. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes without realizing it. But wherever humans went, ecosystems changed, and other species often disappeared. The migration itself was not a single wave. Evidence suggests multiple dispersals, different routes, and different timings. Some groups moved through the Levant. Others followed coastlines along southern Asia. Many researchers now favor a coastal route for the main expansion. The shoreline offered reliable food sources, fish, shellfish, and marine resources that inland travelers could not always depend on. And the genetic evidence suggests that populations in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia diverged early from the original founding population. They may have been among the first descendants of those migrants. One group reached Australia at least 65,000 years ago, possibly earlier. And to do that, they had to cross open water. Not a narrow river, not a land bridge. Open ocean. That means boats, rafts, or some deliberate method of crossing channels they could not simply walk across. The mental abilities required for that journey were extraordinary. Planning, communication, cooperation, imagination. The same abilities that would eventually build cities, civilizations, and global networks. Here is what the evidence actually shows. A small group of humans left Africa carrying only a fraction of the continent's genetic diversity. They entered a world already occupied by other species of humans. Some they interbred with, some they displaced, some they drove toward extinction, directly or indirectly. Others survive today only as fragments hidden in our genomes. A few % of Neanderthal DNA here, a handful of Denisovan genes there. Tiny echoes of entire populations that once shared the planet with us. The people who left Africa had no idea what they were beginning. They weren't explorers. They weren't conquerors. They weren't trying to change the world. They were hungry. They were moving. They were doing what humans do. Yet from that single movement came nearly every civilization, every empire, every nation, and almost every person living outside Africa today. Everything else followed.